Book 65, 2019 was Talking to Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell. I have read a lot of Malcolm Gladwell books and they're always quite interesting. Some of them are amazing, some of them are not as good, but generally he's a really good writer and he's always kind of discussing things to get you thinking. It's a really, all of his books are kind of really thought provoking in that sense. What was really interesting about this one is that I listened to this on audio and Gladwell's kind of presented it as like a podcast, which is quite innovative really, because a lot of audio books are just simply kind of like, or they were originally just reading out the books. Now what tends to happen is that the person reading it will act out voices and have different people speaking. But what Gladwell does in this one is he actually, when he's talking about like sources, like for example, when Sandra Bland was arrested by a cop when he was stopping and searching her, he actually plays like what happened, so you can like hear the source for yourself and make your own kind of judgments on it. He also has like kind of musical interludes. Like the music was a little bit tiring because I didn't particularly like it, but I guess if you liked it then that would be okay. But it was kind of produced really, really well, so that was kind of nice. I actually bought this book because I thought it was about talking to strangers, like taking it on face value, but it obviously, because it's Malcolm Gladwell, it's kind of like a little bit more depth than that, a bit more nuancy than that. Basically, the premise of this book is that we think that we're very good as human beings at judging other people and kind of understanding them just kind of by how they behave. But actually what this book suggests and demonstrates and supports with lots of evidence is that you cannot intuit what someone is like just by looking at them and by meeting them a couple of times and by judging them on their kind of outward behaviour, because not everybody reacts in similar situations to how you do, so it becomes kind of complicated to understand why they're behaving in that way. What Malcolm Gladwell does is he takes well-known cases of things about stop and search and systemic racism, child molestation, rape, murder, double agents, all kinds of things that in the media are kind of like accepted as being explained a certain way, and he challenges that status quo thinking and gives you kind of the other side of it. So it is really interesting at challenging your own kind of accepted viewpoints, and how things are kind of presented. When people are asked to see if they can spot a liar, only 56% of the time can they tell if someone's lying. So that's quite a lot of the time where they're getting it wrong. They think they know that someone's lying or not, but actually they can't really tell. They've done studies where judges have determined whether or not someone should be granted bail on whether they look like they're going to commit a crime again or not. So obviously if they look like they're going to commit a crime, they won't be granted bail, and found that computers are actually better at predicting whether or not the person would go on to commit a crime, and the computer suggestions, using personal pronouns there, it was 25% less likely to commit crimes overall than the judges' suggestions. So it just shows that humans, because of their biases, misinterpret people all the time. So Malcolm Gladwell suggests that we have this kind of default to truth. So we're very unlikely to kind of question our own biases because we've got this default. He gives an example of Chamberlain and Hitler, and how Hitler very easily, hoodwinked Chamberlain into thinking that Hitler was no threat to anybody else and he wasn't going to, invade places when he actually did, because Hitler gave him like his famous handshake that suggested that they were on good terms. So you can't interpret people like, when you meet someone and you think that you're a good judge of character, what Gladwell's suggesting is that you're not at all, and neither is anybody else. What was really, really interesting part of the book was that Gladwell talks about transparency, and that if someone is behaving in a transparent way, so for example, if someone's happy and on their face it's happy, if they're sad and on their face it's sad, then yeah, you'll be able to judge that person accurately. So that's a matched expression. But when someone's mismatched, it's very, very difficult to get that right. So they give the example of when they were doing the study about whether you could spot a liar or not, one girl was very, very nervous about being accused of lying, and people thought that meant that she was a liar, when in actual fact she was just nervous at being accused of being a liar when she wasn't. So she was mismatched. So people thought she was a liar when she wasn't, because her behaviour didn't make sense, because if you weren't lying, why would you be nervous? But for that individual, that was her response. So everyone responds to things differently, and Gladwell kind of applies this to the famous cases that I mentioned just previously. So for example, at the Sandra Bland case, Sandra Bland was being quite antagonistic and quite defensive in response to being stopped and searched, and the patrol guy couldn't understand why she was behaving like that. If if she was innocent, she wouldn't behave like that, so he kind of assumed that there was something there that he needed to investigate further, when in actuality, like, it was a lot of background stuff of her and what she'd been through as a person, and how many times she'd been stopped before, and her financial problems and things that were contributing to her behaving like that. And I thought that was really interesting, because a lot of the time when people are it's just something completely different, when people are anxious, they tend to be interpreted by other people as being rude or being stuck up or arrogant. And it's not that they are any of those things, it's just that when someone's anxious, they can't really kind of take part in a social situation, and they kind of distance themselves from everybody else. So to everyone else, that looks like they're being snobby, but actually it's just anxiety, and people misinterpret that all the time. And people seem to think that like, that anxious people are rude, and they're not. They're just really, really anxious, and so that's a mismatched behaviour that people don't tend to pick up on. They think that anxious people like shake and show all the kind of symptoms of nervousness, but actually some anxious people are very good at hiding it, but it comes across in another way, like rudeness or arrogance. So I thought it was really interesting to kind of think of what other behaviours come across. And Gladwell uses the example of Amanda Knox, how when her friend was murdered, instead of crying and responding in a way that people would expect, she was deflecting her hurt at the situation by making jokes and kind of behaving a little bit weirdly. Like, people were like, thinking that she'd done it because of the way that she was behaving, but that was just her personality and how she behaved. So I thought it was really interesting that we assume people are a certain way by how they come across to us, but actually everyone's individual and behaves in very unique ways, and you can't generalise and apply what you think from one person to everybody else and view them in light of yourself, because you are a very different person to everybody else. And as well, I thought it was really interesting that Gladwell starts to talk about the case of rape on campus, and he discussed it from the point of view of the rapist. Now, before I heard what Gladwell had to say on that, I had an opinion of it, and after I listened to Gladwell, I thought, wow, like, that's a whole other perspective that's been completely ignored in the media and completely ignored by everybody, because it's kind of, it's wrong to rape someone, so you side with the person that's being raped. But if you think about the context of the situation and the fact that a lot of situations like that, alcohol is involved, and Gladwell goes on to discuss alcohol and the effects on the brain, and how you can be fully functioning, or so it seems outwardly, but inwardly you're completely blacked out. And that interpretation of that behaviour is more difficult if you yourself are intoxicated. And so obviously a crime's been committed and it needs to be kind of addressed, and the person needs to serve time because of that, but it kind of makes it less viewed as evil and more viewed as just a messed up situation where both parties didn't know what was happening and misinterpreted each other's signals and the rest of it. I mean, obviously you have to listen to the book to kind of get the full insight on that, but it is worth a listen or worth a read, because it offers the other side of the argument that explains human behaviour in a kind of more compassionate way than just kind of asserting that people are evil or they're not evil. Like, human behaviour is a lot more complicated than that, a lot more complex, and so this book's really good at challenging status quo thinking, so definitely kind of give it a read. I enjoyed it.